Hey Anthony, great response, and from what you said and the comments I've been reading, I need to clear one thing up real quick. I think there's a huge difference between the creative process for rock bands and pop artists. As I see it, rock bands are constantly sound checking when they're out on tour. They tend to jumble their set lists around here and there to make some variety, and a lot of them write while they're out on the road. And some of them even record while they're out on the road, doing bits and pieces here and there. That's really what happened behind R.E.M's New Adventures in Hi-Fi record, and it's one of my all-time favorite albums. Pop acts, on the other hand, especially those on the last few decades, they pretty much go out and they do the same exact show every single night. Mostly because they've got their cute little dance numbers, extensive video and lighting cues, and other things that have to be right on time every single night. Then for an overwhelming majority of these pop stars, when they get back to the studio, they're pretty much handed their new album by a team of writers and A&R people. There's nothing personal about it. It's a totally artificial process. Honestly, that's exactly why I chose the examples I did last week, because the pop process and the rock process are two completely different beasts. Oh, and ouch on the dig on the Clash's Cut the Crap album. They remain my all-time favorite band, so I'm gonna have to defend that one. Give me a few more years on that one and maybe I'll be able to come up with a decent defense of that record, but probably not. Who the hell writes a song called Finger Popping? Anyway, your big question is a great one, and it's the one that I debate all the time. Is the boldness in music gonna have to come out of the underground? In a word, yes. In 3 words, it always has. I mean, whether you're talking about new forms of jazz or folk in the 1940s and 50s, or popular rock in the 60s, or psychedelic and metal in the 60s into the early 70s, or punk rock at the end of the 70s, or hip hop in the early 80s, or maybe you're talking about punk rock in the early 90s, you know, when they rebranded it as grunge, but it was still punk rock to anybody who had a clue. Regardless of the period or style, it always started in the underground, and it was always a direct response to whatever was going on in the mainstream at the time. I mean, it's the same story decade after decade. The major labels find some new sound that's starting to swell in the underground, and they figure out how to mass market it. Then the bands that just want fame try to adjust their sound to sound like that, and the bandwagon begins. Very quickly, we get overdosed with that sound coming from every single label, and it's all over the charts. And then around that time, a group of new musicians start some counterculture sound in the underground, and the cycle begins again. But I think maybe the more important and perhaps more intriguing group of people is those who are able to live on the fringe of music for their entire career, or those people who are able to live on the fringe with one strong foot in the mainstream. Whether that's Nine Inch Nails, Bjork, Gogol Bordello, or legends like Tom Waits, Frank Zappa, or the Cramps, they've always made the idea of making the music exactly how they wanted, regardless of what the public thought, their #1 priority. It's these sort of performers, along with artists like the Cinematic Orchestra, or Atmosphere, or Le Butcherettes, who live completely in the underground, that keep things progressing. They keep pushing boundaries in music. And in many ways, I have to think they're the unspoken inspiration behind a lot of larger acts. But all of this leads me to my bigger question. Does the underground really even exist anymore? Every city used to have their handful of secretly amazing bands, or maybe the band was big enough that they were even regional. But with all of the access we have in the digital age, has this term become irrelevant? Like we've said before, musicians can so easily record and release their own music through things like SoundCloud and Bandcamp these days. So doesn't this completely change what it actually means to be underground? A decade ago, an underground band from Ohio trying to easily sell their music to someone in Cambodia was just impossible. But these days, that's an assumed amount of accessibility in a band. Clearly, it's not destroying the underground, but what do you see as the long-term implications of this shift? Do you really think that it levels the playing field like a lot of people say, or that it's going to damage the integrity of underground musicians? Or is there a new challenge for bands to try and stay off the radar and really be underground? Is that some sort of new trend we're going to start seeing in music? Okay, soapboxing over for this week. I'm going to try and come up with at least one solid defense for Cut the Crap by next week, but let's be honest, instead of that, I'm probably going to end up listening to the self-titled Clash record a number of times instead. I'll see you on Friday.